geometry as the process of creation. Even if it's just a case of like symmetry, radial symmetry or bilateral symmetry, we have this attraction to that archetypal beauty that's using these ratios correctly, and that's what's fascinating me. That's what I want to get into geometry.
Hi everyone, so my name is Lucie Rose and this channel is about geometric art and traditional arts and crafts. This is the first of a series of interviews with other geometers and artists to discuss together what geometry in its art form really is. And for this first one, I am interviewing Adam Williamson, who is an artist, a geometer, a stone and wood carver, and also a calligrapher. And he also teaches geometry, carving, ornamental patterns, and so on. He travels a lot for art projects and also for teaching, with Richard Henry for the Art of Islamic Patterns, taking groups to amazing locations such as Cairo, Fez, India, New Mexico, and so on. He also has various projects with the King's Foundation School of Traditional Arts. And this conversation takes place in his studio in London, and it was filmed in October 2023, so I know it's been a little while. And I really apologize in advance. I had a little issue with the recording, and the quality of the sound really drops from the middle of the video. But the conversation was really interesting, so I still decided to share it. And also, together with Adam, we are teaching a workshop this coming August in London in his studio, and I will say more about that at the end of the video. I hope you enjoy this conversation. So, hi Adam.
Hello, hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. This is the Art of Islamic Pattern studio here.
Yes, this is the Art of Islamic Pattern. It's a profound pattern studio. It's also my studio where I do my carving and construction work.
Yeah.
And it's all based around geometry and pattern.
And so you're mainly a sculptor, or how would you describe what your work?
Yeah, I've spent most of my career carving stone. Now I work a lot in plaster. I also do wood carving too. I was brought up by a carpenter and a woodworker, so that's my kind of roots. So yeah, anything that I can use to a chisel on.
Volume and a bit of matter.
Yes.
All right. And you work a lot with geometry?
Yeah,
well?
So my focus of application is all geometry and pattern based, whether it's biomorphic or geometric. It's all about the pattern.
Yeah. And how would you define what geometry, the way you practice it or the way we practice it? Like, how would you explain what it is, how it works?
Geometry as the process of creation. That's what fascinates me. I mean, like, I'm interested in ornamentation of sort of sacred spaces, of elevating spaces with pattern, and the patterns themselves are all things that are found within the natural world around us. And when I'm looking at pattern in this sort of basic, simplistic way, in the sort of division of the circle, and these formulas and ratios that create these patterns, underlining all of the final ornamentation, there is a code, and that's what I'm really interested in. This code that the universe is moving in, is spiraling around, is growing and manifesting from. And that's why in antiquity people were fascinated with these patterns, because they were interested in who are we, where are we going, what is the formula, what is the basis. And even though they couldn't see the DNA helix, which we now know is based on the golden proportion, they understood that the sacred cut, as Plato called it, they understood that these sequence of numbers, these ways of patterns manifested, were all based on something special, and it's that thing that excites me. And we all have this concept of archetypal beauty, and when things are formulated in the correct way with these particular ratios to create the patterns, we have this attraction to it, even if it's just a case of like symmetry, radial symmetry or bilateral symmetry, we have this attraction to that archetypal beauty that's using these ratios correctly, and that's what's always fascinated me. That's what I want to get into geometry.
How this sort of proportions and logic are pleasing to the eye for some.
They're pleasing to the soul.
Yeah.
And we don't always know why. And in contemporary art, in a way, we're fighting against it, because often contemporary art is sort of maybe almost nihilistic in like the deconstruction of these forms. But for most of civilization, over the last, recorded civilization, we're interested in beauty and emulation and emulating nature and emulating what we see around us.
When we talk about the way we practice geometry, sometimes it's hard for people to sort of grasp what it's about. Like, what is the difference between just using geometric shapes and just sort of pure math geometry? I feel like we're somewhere in between.
Yeah, as a craftsman, geometry is purely practical in its approach, not mathematical, even though that's been my way of understanding maths, through drawing and through shapes and through the way they manifest. Our process is without measurement, so it usually starts by dividing up a circle, and it's going to be a 5-fold pattern or 8, 12. That would be the beginning of evolving a pattern, and then everything is found from the pattern itself. So there's usually a little bit like a chess game. There's a few different entries that you can do, and after that, that's when the patterns start to become unique and go in their certain directions. But they're all based on particular archetypal structures, and that could be the golden proportion, or it could be like a 4-fold pattern based on the seasons and the cardinal directions. And in antiquity, these were the kind of concepts behind these patterns.
And when and how did you first get in touch with geometry, or with this practice of geometry?
At school, it was the one subject I could excel in graphic design, and in back then it was mostly slide rule, so you'd use a right angle and a drawing board, and I could instantly understand how to kind of deconstruct or reconstruct these patterns. And then it was always part of what I was doing. So whether I was working in carpentry with my father, like taking measurements, using different tools. So it started off more from a crafts perspective, and then
from childhood of learning the craft,
learning woodwork and building, anything from laying paving stones to all these things. Also train your eye to kind of there's nothing like having to lift a very heavy paving stone to to not trick yourself whether something's going to fit or not. I think it sort of burns that something into your psyche.
You have to know it's going to fit.
You have to know it's going to fit. You don't want to do this twice. And and so I think I learned that way, which is really interesting. And I learned from kind of doing crafts and building to then having to implement geometry onto that, like not knowing enough and having to study through necessity, rather than sort of studying through a sort of more architectural pathway and then applying that. It was more from a functional, practical application that I needed the necessity for these drawings and tools. And then I went and studied various things. Part of my training was in illumination, and I started looking at holy texts, Quran frontispieces and Bible frontispieces, Celtic work, and so having to understand how these pages were put together was a sort of entry into the more refined geometry compass work. So you were already working on, when you started doing illumination, you carried on the sort of geometry. Exactly, so that's, But at the time, all of these interests that I had were quite disparate. And then I ended up at the Prince School of Traditional Arts as an artist in residence, because I was a bit too young to go there.
And how did you find out about that school?
Just through various recommendations, and I was also doing a drawing a life drawing class above the school,
Yeah, right.
and then I ended up there at the interview somehow, and I spoke to and Keith was there, and he sort of convinced me to come and gave me a place.
So this is Critchlow, just in case.
Keith Critchlow he's a sort of a leading expert on sacred geometry, and he's almost more of a philosopher and a great person. He's been my teacher, was my teacher for a long time, and his first sort of introduction lecture really brought all those different pieces together: the craft, the geometry, spirituality, the historical interests, into kind of one application through the kind of these concepts of geometry that I touched upon. And then the rest is
just evolves.
and then everything evolved from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did you start teaching it?
Well, teaching's been a funny thing. Teaching's always been something I've resisted. And while I was at the Prince School as an artist in residence, I ended up helping out a lot of people when I was there with particular skills that I had, because many of these traditional crafts that I've studied with different people. So I spent a lot of time going and spending weeks or weekends or months with people in Malaysia, in Wales and Spain, just looking for craftsmen to study with, and that's how I really attuned my knowledge and approach. So I had a certain skill set when I was there, and I was asked to sort of help out people, and that's really where the teaching started. And
so a bit more through the craft.
Through crafts, yeah. And then I had a studio, and people would come to the studio, and it was quite informal. So I'd have people come in, and I could help in some way, and I was happy to do that. And then it just grew from there a little bit more. Then let's go look at these patterns on site. So we'd take people to Spain, and then we'd take people to Morocco and Turkey, and then it became more and more popular. But it certainly wasn't something that I went out looking for. I was just happy to do my own work.
Yeah, as well. But,
yes, yeah. But I'm very glad, because the great thing about teaching is that you're stretched way more than you would be if you're just working by yourself, because you follow your own interests, and there's huge gaps in your knowledge, because this is what I need to carve this. I need to know these few things. But when you're in class, you're getting questioned. You're getting put on the spot all the time, and you have people with different skills and different skill sets coming through. So it's actually been fantastic the way that over the last 20 years it's really pushed me to understand and go away and come back with
dig a bit further.
Yeah, and the travel too, and working with different craftsmen. So I feel like, for learning, it's great when you get to meet so many people. And one of the things I do notice though is that when you speak to craftsmen, whether it's in deep in the Medina in Marrakesh, or in the jungle in Malaysia, or in Jamaica, or in a reservation in Canada, they're all saying similar things, and they all have similar approaches to their work, and there's so much reverence and respect and humility with what they do, and those are the things that they're always trying to impart. And I was often usually go to these places looking for the technical skills, like what chisels do you use, how do you make this, what's the history, but they would always really want to just share that with me, and it was interesting how important it was about kind of the wholesome approach, and the humility to the craft, and the purpose, and the devotional aspects to what they were doing, and getting into the right state, and then practical parts are that's fine, that'll come.
It will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true that with my parents we had the occasion to meet with some Native American people, and some of them went, the craft is really important, of making everything in the objects you use very beautiful. And about the practice, they would often say that it's praying with your hands. And that's quite the
It's true. Every tradition has this, karma yoga. It's this devotional practice. In the reservations I worked in Canada, they would if they were making a canoe, they'd have to spend a whole period of time in the forest next to the tree, checking there are no animals in the tree, like getting to know the tree before they would then take it down and carve it right there in situ for practical but also spiritual reasons. And this was this same kind of devotional observations were carried out in Malaysia, for example, where I studied carving. They were saying before they started work, you need to make sure that you had no quarrels with anyone, the place was, everything was tidy, or life was kind of tidy in a way, and then you'd wait for this thing called the Guru Asa, where you'd kind of connect and to maybe the ancestors or the divine, and then things would just come through you, and you'd be like a source to transfer this knowledge. And what's interesting is that for years and years this was the case, and what they're suggesting is that like what we're producing is not an individual pursuit, it's something that is like generational, but also like if you are really open to that, then you're kind of creating something fresh and new, but it's from a lineage, it's from this
connected to something a bit higher than the individual.
And something that, and so whilst that might sound like that this is a sort of a special thing for like whatever's being produced, but it's actually very humble, and it's just part of the whole. And that's like in Gothic tracery and these monumental tasks in the past, there were no names, that no one assigned themselves to the work, it was all devotional. And so like it's just a completely different approach. And that's
the work is more important than the practical.
And the doing the work, the process, the work was the prayer.
And do you find, like, sometimes people ask me if, before doing geometry, I put myself in sort of a special, you were talking about those traditions where you have to sort of be sure you didn't have any quarrels before doing the work. Do you implement some of that in your own work, or is it just, like, I don't personally, like I find it's just an interesting question.
I like to.
Yeah.
It's difficult all the time, and it's your job all the time, and you're like out carving in the rain, and you're on a deadline, and it's not always easy to just have everything in place before you start working. That's the ideal. And then there's practices while you're doing the work to like, concentrating on your breath and the thoughts that you're having, because like whatever your state you're in, you're sort of putting that into the work, and that's what resonates with people. So I like to manifest beautiful things that are going to have a positive effect on people, but it's difficult. I think I feel very lucky because as a sort of we have this. I find it difficult to just sit and meditate on a flame or whatever. But if I have a purpose and the repetition of geometry and pattern making, whether it is carving or painting or just drawing, it's all the same. And I'm using these archetypal shapes and forms. It's much easier to get into a kind of meditative state.
Sort of puts you. I mean, even if you start and you're not in. A specific mood is going to either it's not going to work, I find, and you have to stop and start later, or it's going to put you in.
And that's what people find. That's why so many people get hooked on the process, because it seems, I mean, like you say geometry, it sounds very arcane and boring. But as soon as people start drawing and they get into the process and the safety of the journey, and then you get hooked very quickly. Because you can get there, you can get to that space where it's like what you're concentrating on is beautiful and endless in its journey, and it's a sort of safety in that what you're working with is this pure kind of source, and it just takes enough away for the monkey mind to stop. So I feel very fortunate that I can work in this field.
Yes. Do you have a favorite style of geometry or favorite place of like motif that you really enjoy more than others, or not especially?
I just have phases of things I'm interested in. I'm fascinated with the story and the history of of these patterns and ornamentation, not just geometry, but ornamentation, pattern in general, and how they've developed and how they've moved through the Silk Road and they're adopted by certain people. And there seems to be just flowerings of creativity. So often after like a particular civilization takes over another one, and then there's a bit of a carnage, then it's usually like a period of, after that, renewal of kind of peace and flowering of the arts and culture. And you see this in different periods. And then that becomes the tradition, and then they kind of carry that on, that process or that style. But when it came about, it was revolutionary, right? So this kind of idea of tradition is an interesting subject, like whether it is, when people look at it as something that's been there forever, but it wasn't. At some point, it had to like burst into it. It was
like the flourishing. Word you used.
Yeah, so they have these periods of time, these moments, and those are kind of things that I get interested in, like the origins of a particular style, and then it gets adapted and changed and ornamented. Sometimes it just gets over ornamented too much, and then it kind of needs another renewal.
Start again. So what's your current interest in terms of?
Yeah, I find that there's a lot of early synthesis of patterns around sort of 7th and 8th century. Lots were going on then. Different kind of spiritual overlaps and
any specific region?
Yeah, in like what I liked things that were happening in like the Mosquito in Cordoba, and ornamentation there, and also in Ibn Tulun in Cairo. And a lot of things have come from that, the sort of Samara style. So they were adapting from this kind of period in central Iraq, which it's all but gone now. There's nothing there of those patterns, but they were sort of working on them. And there's the beginnings of really interesting geometric patterns and sort of free form, zoomorphic, biomorphic forms. So I like those original flowerings because you get a sense of the energy of something like a well stream appearing, and then rather than like this is just a kind of repetition of something that's been done for hundreds of years, because there's a different sensitivity to the kind of to the pattern. It's not like a repetition. It's
the sort of the angle changes or the And you mentioned all of the biomorphic systems. It's a big part of your work, and I guess especially in Islamic art, the biomorph and the geometry are very closely linked. How would you say that they relate to each other?
Yeah, I mean, even within the biomorphic forms, they are quite geometric. There would still be a series of stages to go through, but you have to find them in a different way, so they're not reliant on the tool. So within the geometric pattern, it's all done with a compass and a ruler, and you can approach it without necessarily inputting the necessity for skill in your hand.
In terms of like the curves you can draw with your hand.
I mean, you can, a whole new skill set's required, and to get to a similar place, with a compass, you could be standing at any angle, and it's always going to draw a perfect circle. But if you wanted to draw a circle by hand, you have to be above it. You have to really be involved, and you have to connect with your body in a different way. There's definitely levels of skill within geometry, and obviously, you have to know your equipment and tools, but as far as the application, there's a little bit more work. And so something else comes out, and it evokes another quality within you when you're having to
add the biomorphs.
When you're having to draw these things by hand. I mean, I'm interested in drawing geometry by hand as well, and without compass and ruler.
It's an interesting question as well, I think,
Yeah, which is possible, and I do this a lot because you can use the body, and I like to get away from the reliance on that, because I find that if you rely on the tools too much, you can't jump from between the two. Whereas some things I like, you could spend ages trying to bisect a certain point, but you can just guess that it's like trying to find the center of the centimeter.
And the more you work with stuff like this, the easier it gets.
And the more you rely on yourself, and it has a different flavor to it than relying on the tools too much. So I find that if I stretch myself way out and do everything a complete pattern by hand, a geometric pattern, then coming back to the tools, there's lots more freedom. Yeah.
Right. Can you tell us something about this beautiful background?
Oh, right. Well, this is it's a piece. I'm not sure where it's going, but it's in plaster. It's a sort of tinted plaster with ochres and siennas and umbers. It's for a show and charger, and it's looking at fractal golden proportion 5-fold patterns. Like we were saying, you probably also see these would be the grounding for a gothic tracery.
Tangent circles. That would end up gothic.
So I'm not sure where it's going, but I'm just fascinated with the like every one of the golden proportion, because all of the sizes of these circles relate to each other in the golden proportion, the way that it evolves. So it's a little bit of an experiment, which is nice for me, because usually I have a sort of more of a commissioned goal for the product, but this is me just having some fun.
And so I have a more technical question, because it's something that I try and work out sometimes as well, and it's sort of often a question. Did you sort of geometrically found the centers for those circles, or do you find them by placing your compass and finding what fits?
So if this was going to be on paper, I would probably draw it out with centers. But just due to the nature of I don't want to have too many scratched lines in the plaster, so I eyeball it. And I have techniques, and it actually works out much quicker that way.
I find that often in because Gothic geometry is all about tangent circles, and sometimes I find that you could or can find a way to find the actual geometric construction for some of those centers, but the amount of lines and time you would spend compared to if compasses are your tools that you use every day, you do end up being able to move your compass point and find something that's...
I think once I've got the main circles in, after that, you kind of know, and then after a day of drawing them, I even know what's going to be 1/5. I already know. Like, you can just see it. So all of these are like eyeball. You can see maybe there's a couple of little tries that you can see there, because that was the last one. But certainly when you've got like this circle, will be very easy, or this one, because I will place the compass one leg there, and I'll know where the center is between these 2 points, and then I'll know that that's the center there. So then I can pretty much just check it before drawing it. But those ones are really quick. So if you do it in a systematic way, you can very quickly
get used to the shapes as well. So.
And then before you know it, you don't even know it. You don't even think about it.
Right. Looking forward to see how it turns out.
Me too. Yes, it's a few more circles to go, I think.
Okay.
But it takes a lot longer to. It's not like drawing with pen. You have to draw it like 5 times.
And inscribe the circles.
Inscribe the next. Yeah. And then if you don't get it right, then you're in trouble. So, but I feel like many of the original pieces were all done this way. So I'm not sure. Maybe you know more than I do about this, but in the Gothic cathedrals, they used to have plaster, and so even from like drawing
apparently I don't think how much we are sure of, but it seems to be this or earth or wood.
But it would make sense, because it's a fantastic material to work on. I'm inscribing to carve, so that I need like a stop cut line that's deeper. But actually, if I was just scratching it lightly, it's very quick. And you can just scratch it. You can use a chisel to free it up again. And they would have had lots of mortar, and so making a plaster, it would make a lot of sense.
There are some cathedrals in France where they have actually inscribed in the stone some of the don't know the English name for it, but the guidelines for then cutting the stone.
Yeah.
And those that are inscribed in the stone are used as teaching tools for the companions.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, they need to sketch these out, not just the facades, but also the core walls and various elements. Yeah. Especially with all the repeating units. So obviously they could be worked in wood. I'm sure it was carved because it'd be easier to describe it in plaster than it would be to try and paint it, draw it, or ink it in.
And lastly, maybe what are your next teaching plans? Do you have any?
Well, I have
trips? That's one of the amazing things that you do.
Yeah, so we have trips year round where we go to Turkey, Morocco, all over the world, and then we're also in America, running classes, Australia, all over, and then I run classes in the studio here too, in East London. So we'll link everything. To the everything can be found on the website Art of Islamic Pattern. Is that right? Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much. So, as I was saying at the beginning of the video, together with Adam, we will be teaching a 2-day workshop in August in his studio in London. It will be around Gothic ornaments. So on the first day, I will be teaching the geometric drawing of a Gothic rose window design. And then there will be 1 day of stone carving with Adam of a Gothic panel. So do come and join us. It will be on the weekend of the 10th and 11th of August. And you can check out the links in the description below for more information and to register. And in the description below, you will also find links to Adam's Instagram and website and to various topics that we discussed during the video. I really loved what Adam was saying about not relying entirely on the tools for geometry and exploring freehand as well. And in general about how the relationship to geometry is a little different from a craftsman point of view than from when you only draw geometry. Let us know in the comments what you found interesting in the conversation and maybe what you would like to know more about. I really hope you enjoy the conversation, even with that little sound issue. It was my first interview. I know that there's room for improvement with like the questions, the filming, the editing and so on. Like for example, my camera decided to refocus only on Adam during the interview, although I thought the setting was off. But anyhow, I really enjoyed the process and I will do more. The next one coming up will be with Richard Henry. So Richard, who works with Adam for the Art of Islamic Patterns, and Richard is also the current Director of Studies for the MA program at the King's Foundation School of Traditional Arts, and that interview will be coming up during the summer. So do subscribe if you don't want to miss that, and to also see all the geometric tutorials, tips and tricks on this channel. And see you soon!